Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. So far on the channel, we've been able to closely cover the class of Rogue for the Season 1 of War Within. On the channel, we've been able to cover Assassination as well as Subtlety, but with how well Outlaw Rogues are performing during Season 1 War Within, I thought it's about time for us to take a look at the spec that I'm most likely going to be maining for this first season. In this guide, we're going to go over all of the basics to help new and returning players get started, but also go over some of the more advanced things you can do in order to maximize the effectiveness of your Outlaw Rogue within raids as well as dungeon content. This guide is going to focus on both builds of Outlaw Rogue, the ambush hidden opportunity builds as well as the keep it rolling builds, and go over how to play this spec effectively, and even recommend some of the WeakAuras you can utilize in order to make certain aspects like roll the bones, between the eyes, and even keep it rolling easier to play around with. This is a very long guide, so I'll include chapter marks down below so you can skip around to different sections of this video as you see fit, or if you need to come back to this video later, but also we'll have a written version of this guide in our channel Discord, linked down in the description below. As always, if you guys want to see more regular updates like these for the War Within expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. Otherwise, let's dive right into my favorite spec of this expansion. So first things first, what is new with the Outlaw Rogue heading into the War Within expansion? And for the most part, there's not a lot of new stuff coming to Rogues in general. The spec of Outlaw still got plenty of RNG around its Roll the Bones ability, but it did get a few talent updates in order to help with some of those RNG adjustments, like with Count the Odds. For Outlaw in particular, if you played in Dragonflight Season 3 and 4, we had a fantastic tier set. The current tier set we got right now is not really as good, especially when it comes to the RNG of Roll the Bones, which was the big blessing from Dragonflight. But the couple of talent adjustments we did get does make the spec feel a little bit more consistent. If anything, you're still a gunslinging, grapple hooking, saber slashing pirate that you were in Dragonflight Season 3. But this time around, we have access to hero talents, though for the most part, we are going to be really playing around Fatebound, not as much as Trickster, because Trickster in current meta is just not quite as competitive. So whenever I look up a guide for any of classes, I usually like to start off with the talent tree first, so that's where we're going to begin our guide video as well. Now, all of the builds that we'll talk about here, I'll have import codes to these builds over on our written guide over on the Discord channel for the Outlaw Rogue Guide Season 1, but also in the description of this video, and those import codes you'll be able to import directly into the game. So if you open up your talent tree, go to import, paste the import code into the section here, and you can name the build whatever you like, and you can basically import those codes and import those talent builds directly onto your character without having to put points into every single one of these talent trees in order to make it look just like mine does right here on your screen. Now, for Outlaw Rogues, there's going to be two primary builds that will be focused around, and these builds are really going to depend on how much haste and how much gear you have in your rogue. Both of the builds are fairly viable and are very, very close to each other in terms of performance. Some builds are going to be a little bit easier to get into and are more recommended for newer players, while others are a little bit more advanced that can offer more damage but can be a little bit more punishing. First of all, we'll go over the recommended, the easy to get into build, which are going to be hidden opportunity builds. Outlaw Rogue hidden opportunity builds are those focused around the ability of ambush, by allowing ambush to gain all of the benefits of Sinister Strike, in some cases replacing Sinister Strike. And with the talent of Audacity, pistol shot procs allow us to sometimes use ambush outside of stealth, making it a fairly core ability as part of our regular rotation. When we adjust the hidden opportunity build for AoE content, we end up dropping a few talents but picking up a couple more though. Specifically, we're not going to be running with Facility, instead we're going to be running Lethality. This is because our comp point generation is going to increase through the spec talent tree. But dropping a couple of points here in the spec tree, we'll pick up talents such as Deft Maneuvers, allowing Blade Flurry to now generate comp points, which is amazing in AoE content, and Blade Flurry cleave effectiveness just becomes even better. As part of this build, however, you can make one adjustment if you feel confident about your survivability within dungeons. Normally, rogues run cheat death in case you have a mechanic that accidentally one-shots you, or if you make a mistake, this ability could save you from a death experience. But if you feel like you're pretty good at dodging all of the one-shot mechanics, then you should definitely start utilizing elusiveness instead, which allows evasion and feint to give your rogue damage reduction, which can be utilized against targeted abilities that you can't cloak or vanish or get out of it so easily. Having a 20% damage reduction on Outlaw Rogue is what allows him to be super incredibly tanky within 5-man Mythic Plus content. And when you put together with a talent such as Float Like a Butterfly, Our cooldown reduction mechanic called Restless Blades allows us to reduce the cooldown of evasion and feint every time we spend combo points into a finisher, which means you'll have an incredibly high uptime of evasion and feint, which allows you to have a fairly sizable amount of DR basically throughout majority of the dungeon, which makes you incredibly survivable and really hard to kill. Now, so far we talked about one of the Outlaw Rogue builds, which is Hidden Opportunity, one of the builds that's the easiest to gear for and is the recommended build for any new players. You should stick around playing the Ambush Hidden Opportunity build if you're new to the spec of Rogue. Between Keep It Rolling and Hidden Opportunity, they're both performing relatively similar to one another, but Keep It Rolling is a little bit stronger, though this build is definitely harder to play and it takes a little bit more effort, a little bit more time, it has a bit more variance to it, and this one can be extremely punishing if you don't end up playing the rotation correctly. But the damage it can do can be incredibly good in some cases, and this is a really strong build, especially for AoE content. The Keep It Rolling build plays around the capstone of Keep It Rolling, which allows it to really harness the dice of fate and extend a good set of buffs in order to be able to almost guarantee a 5 buff every time you lock in a good set of buffs. This build also ends up playing with the talent of Echo and Reprimand, which is getting changed in a couple of builds, but Echo and Reprimand is still a core ability that deals a decent amount of physical damage and allows us to anima charge a common point, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment here when we go through the rotation. The AoE version of this build does also drop a few points in order to pick up similar talents like Hidden Opportunity, like Deft Maneuvers, as well as Dance of Steel, in order to further improve our AoE capabilities. As for the hero talents, we don't really have a lot of options as an Outlaw Rogue, sadly, though hopefully in the future Trickster will be gaining a bit more viability. Fatebound as a spec plays around the coin flip mechanic of Hand of Fate. Every time we consume 5 or more combo points into a finisher, we flip a coin. Heads increases our overall damage, stacking every time you can continuously to get heads. And tails will do instant cosmic damage to our target, with that damage scaling up the more times we roll tails. Every time we send our combo points into a finisher, we flip a coin which either lands heads or tails and continues to stack if it matches that same face again and again. Both of the coin effects are fairly strong, and we're going to be mostly not specifically playing around this ability because it's passive, though there will be some additional rotational things that Hidden Opportunity Ambush Outlaw Rogue builds can do in order to take better advantage of the Fatebound playstyle. The capstone of Fatebound is called Fateful Ending. Every time you land heads or tails 7 times in a row, you activate the capstone of Fateful Ending, which increases your agility by 7% while in combat. For the first time you land your Fateful Ending, it grants you an agility buff. Every other time you gain Fateful Ending by flipping more 7 tails or 7 heads, it just deals instant cosmic damage to the target, which is a bit of decent damage. The other playstyle is going to be that of a Trickster, which plays around the Unseen Blade ability, where sinister strikes and ambushes strike our target with an unseen blade. As of right now, however, none of the Outlaw Rogues builds, none of the competitive Rogue builds utilize Trickster, so I'm not really going to talk a lot about Trickster as of this moment, but just know this, right now for PvE content, Trickster is not being used. However, if there are future builds for Trickster that do get utilized, I'll probably make an updated video for some of the Rogue Trickster builds. Next, let's go over the actual playstyle and the rotation of the Outlaw Rogue. The basic gameplay loop of the spec is to build and spend combo points as efficiently as possible, and to make sure you avoid uncapping resources. Out of all 3 specs of Rogue, Outlaw is the one that needs to do the most amount of cooldown management. It's not quite as heavy as Subtlety, but you basically want to keep all of your major big abilities on cooldown at all times, where Subtlety tries to combine those abilities together and line them up into specific windows. Outlaw just wants to keep those abilities on cooldown as much as humanly possible. You should also be aware of the passive of Restless Blades, which is part of the core base Outlaw gameplay, part of a big cooldown reduction aspects of the spec in general. Finisher moves reduce the remaining cooldown of many of your rogue skills by 1 second per combo point spent. The affected skills include but are not limited to Adrenaline Rush, Between the Eyes, Blade Flurry, Blade Rush, Ghosted Strike, Grapple Hook, Keep It Rolling, Killing Spree, Roll the Bone, Sprint, and Vanish. So not only do you have your strong offensive abilities and shorter time cooldowns, but also your mobility and your utility and even defenses, like in the case of the ability like Float Like a Butterfly. A lot of your abilities are linked to you being able to spend your combo points as efficiently as possible, and the faster you spend them, the faster those cooldowns come back up. This is why it's utmost important for Outlaw to keep those major abilities on cooldown as much as possible. So when it comes to talking about the rotation and the playstyle of Outlaw Rogue, I've been trying to figure out the best ways to do it because there's a lot of things to talk about. We got cooldowns, we got calm point builders, and calm point finishers. But I think we'll start out by setting a pretty good base by talking about how to build calm points in the first place. There's two different builds for us to talk about for Rogue. I'll first start out with the ambush hidden opportunity build because that is the easiest to get into. That is the one a lot of novice players should be playing at the very beginning, and then we'll talk about the adjustments you will have for keep it rolling builds. But to get the basics out of the way for your Outlaw Rogue, let's first talk about how to build calm points in the first place. A very basic calm point builder is going to be Sinister Strike. It isn't the most effective calm point builder, but it is a very basic core one. For 45 energy, Sinister Strike strikes at the target for physical damage, and it generates a single calm point. It also has a small chance to hit an additional time, while also making the next pistol shot half cost and do double the damage. Normally, you're not going to be pressing the ability of pistol shot on its own. You'll be waiting until you get those pistol shot procs. So as I press Sinister Strike, there's a chance that will generate 2 calm points instead of 1 because it'll hit 2 times instead of a single time. And when Sinister Strike does hit twice, it activates the proc of Opportunity, which allows your pistol shot to do additional damage and cost less energy. There's a couple of different talents we have, such as Quick Draw, which amplifies the effectiveness of that pistol shot, causing it to generate an additional calm point and do more damage. Plus Fan the Hammer, which allows us to bank up multiple procs of that Opportunity pistol shot proc, that allows us to kind of use pistol shots more than once and generate a ton more calm points. Because of this, in most cases where you can generate more calm points more effectively, pistol shot, because it generates more calm points, deals more damage, fires multiple shots, it's always going to be on a higher priority of a calm point generator. And you can see it generates a lot of calm points in a single go. Pistol shots can also activate the use of Audacity, which allows you to, instead of Sinister Striking, it lets you use the ability of Ambush out of Stealth. Normally Ambush can only be used in Stealth, but with the talent of Audacity you can now use the ability out of Stealth. You don't need to have a separate keybind for the ability of Ambush necessarily, because your Sinister Strike becomes the ability of Ambush instead, which allows it to use 2 keybinds to generate majority of your combo points. Ambush can also be achieved while in stealth, and this will be utilizing within the stealth state whenever we vanish as part of our burst gameplay. So whenever you have access to ambush, it's always your highest priority combo point builder, followed by procs of pistol shot, but if neither one of these is available, then you'll use Sinister Strike. Another calm point builder you have within your talent is called Ghosted Strike. It's a simple calm point builder that generates a single calm point and puts a debuff on the target, causing them to take additional damage. Ghosted Strike is also off the global cooldown, so it doesn't need to replace your ambushes or pistol shots, but you can kind of weave it within an ambush or within a pistol shot. You should still keep a separate keybind for Ghosted Strike because you never really know whether you want to use it or not on a target. Like, you don't really want to use it on an enemy that is about to die. You want to try to use it on a healthier target just so you can get the most amount of value out of your Ghosted Strike when possible. Lastly, if you're playing your rogue in an AoE setting, you'll be using the ability of Deft Maneuvers, where Blade Flurry's initial damage is increased by 100% and the ability generates 1 combo point per target struck. That means we can start utilizing Blade Flurry in AoE content. Ideally though, we want to use Blade Flurry when we're fighting 5 or more targets to generate combo points. Otherwise, we'll mostly be using Blade Flurry as a buff to allow our abilities to cleave multiple targets. Baseline, we want to build combo points until we have 6+ combo points available, then use them on finishers. However, as hidden opportunity builds, you can actually use finishers at 5+ combo points if Subterfuge is active, or if you have procs such as Audacity or opportunity procs for pistol shots. This is because hidden opportunity ambush builds generate combo points quickly and extremely efficiently, so it's actually better for you to be able to spend those combo points as quickly as possible, just so you don't over-generate on those combo points as a valuable resource. Now those finishers are going to be between the eyes, which we'll primarily use within stealth or while Subterfuge is active. This is because we want to take advantage of the Crackshot mechanic. Between the eyes has no cooldown and also dispatches the target at a portion of its effective damage when used from stealth. So for the most part, we'll be using Between the Eyes within stealth windows, and some rogues actually use Between the Eyes only in stealth, or after using the ability of Vanish. Technically, you can use Between the Eyes out of stealth, but only if the cooldown of your Vanish, as well as the cooldown of Adrenaline Rush, are at about 45 seconds or more. So if you're not getting either one of these two abilities within 45 seconds, then you could use between the eyes outside of stealth. The next finisher you want to focus on is Slice and Dice, and you want to maintain this at all times. So Slice and Dice can be easily maintained with the passive of Cut to the Chase. As we use another finisher called Dispatch, we extend the duration of Slice and Dice by 3 seconds. You will still want to spend a couple of comp points just to activate baseline version of Slice and Dice, and then you'll primarily be using Dispatch, our filler finisher, in order to just extend it instead of having to maintain Slice and Dice all on its own. Now, as for Dispatch, this is essentially our finisher if the conditions for the other two are not met. So when you don't have to refresh Slice and Dice and when you can't use Between the Eyes appropriately, then you'll spend the rest of your comp points into Dispatches. Now, the last thing we gotta take a look at is the cooldowns of the Outlaw Rogue. And these are gonna be pretty straightforward, but there are a couple of little intricacies between them. First one we'll take a look at is Blade Flurry. We mentioned Blade Flurry earlier. Generally, Blade Flurry is how we AoE enemies. Outlaw Rogues don't really have a thing called AoE rotation. We just simply maintain Blade Flurry while doing our single target rotation, and Blade Flurry allows our single target abilities to cleave to nearby targets. Blade Flurry is a simple ability to maintain. If you're fighting more than one target, you always want to maintain Blade Flurry at all times. The next cooldown you want to maintain is Roll the Bones. It's kind of like Slice and Dice. It's a buff that it provides you, but it gives you an assortment of different buffs. It can either grant you a buff to give more energy or increase your critical strike chance by 20%, while further increasing the critical strike chance of Between the Eyes. You can generate additional comp points, and those additional comp point generators can deal 15% more damage. It can also increase your overall damage while increasing the effectiveness of your Blade Flurry, or increase your cooldown reduction effectiveness for all of your finishers. Or it can make your Sudden Strike be more likely to strike a second time, which can offer you more pistol shot procs. Now, when you roll the bones, you can gain an assortment of these buffs, either 1 buff, 2 buffs, or 5 buffs of any of those combos. With Roll the Bones, if you don't have a buff, you want to use it in order to maintain a buff at all times. And the only time you want to re-roll a buff is when you have a single buff, but you can guarantee that your next buff is going to be 2 buff combo. The next buff is going to be Adrenaline Rush, which is a deceptively long cooldown of 3 minutes, but it's actually much shorter because of the Outlaw Rogue's cooldown reduction mechanic. Adrenaline Rush is a simple buff that you want to maintain basically as much as humanly possible throughout a combat encounter. The only times you may want to delay using Adrenaline Rush is if, let's say, you're fighting a trash bag in a dungeon, but they're going to be dying in like 15 seconds or so then it will be more effective for you to use Adrenaline Rush on a fresh new trash bag or boss fight that's going to be following what you're currently fighting. Adrenaline Rush also benefits from a number of talents in our talent tree, like improved Adrenaline Rush, which causes the ability to generate full comp points when you use it. So just try to maximize the effectiveness of those comp points, and it's better to use Adrenaline Rush when you have like 1 or 2 comp points available so you don't over-generate and waste comp points. Another talent is going to be Loaded Dice, which allows Adrenaline Rush to amplify or amp up your next Roll the Bones, so it guarantees at least 2 buffs next time you roll it. This could be either 2 buff combo or potentially 5 buff combo, which is kind of rare but also very strong. So if you are playing around Roll the Bones, watch out for the Loaded Dice procs. Next cooldown is going to be Vanish. We talked a little bit about Vanish earlier, like the Crackshot, so we know the importance of Vanish, and stealth is extremely important. We also talked about Subterfuge. That is how you proc through a Vanish. After you use stealth, while in combat, you remain in the stealth state for 6 seconds. And ideally, we want to use Vanish only inside of our Adrenaline Rush windows. It's because during that burst window, we want to get as much value out of our Crackshot ability as possible. But also, the ability of Adrenaline Rush does not lose duration while we are stealthed. Subterfuge counts as a stealth-like state. So while Subterfuge is active, we actually don't lose the uptime of our ability of Adrenaline Rush. So if you stealth, press Adrenaline Rush, you'll see that the ability is actually not losing any uptime whatsoever. So as you start spamming Between the Eyes, which actually can refund its own comp points with AC per sleeve, which makes it super bursty, as you see, we're losing the uptime, we vanish, we actually freeze the uptime, allowing us to generate a bunch of comp points and use Between the Eyes as much as possible during our little burst window. And the last cooldown we have is going to be Thistlety. This one is easy. It has a mastery restored element, but also grants us energy. We primarily use Thistlety for energy. If you're talented into Thistlety, we generally want to use this ability whenever we're below 50 energy. And that's it. We don't really care for the mastery component. We don't try to line up with our cooldowns or anything like that. We just want to use it whenever we drop below 50 energy. And you'll primarily be using Thistlety within raid settings, so it's not something you'll have to pay attention to within Mythic Plus content. And that's going to be the very basics of how to play the Ambush Outlaw Rogue with a hidden opportunity build, but you can kind of see how it's a lot of cooldown management. It's calm point building, calm point spending, weaving in cooldowns, and because of cooldown reduction, all of these major cooldowns, whether they're 2 minutes or 1 minute, they actually recharge so much faster, so you can have pretty fast uptime of all of these abilities. From there on though, I do want to move on to the keep it rolling version of the Outlaw build, which is going to be a little bit different. This one is going to be a lot more gear dependent. You need to have between 18 to 20% haste before you can optimally play this build. It's also a much more punishing version of the build, or punishing version of the Outlaw Rogue, but it can also achieve some fantastic damage, and you may even prefer it with an AoE content if you have the right stats. But definitely give this build a try, though be aware this is one of the more challenging builds to play around with because it has a bit more cooldown management than the other build of Ambush. And just like the other build, we'll start off with the basic building blocks. We talked a lot of these building blocks before, but things are going to be a little different. We don't have ambushes for this build. Especially actually with keep it rolling builds, you don't even use ambush in stealth. It is not an ability worth pressing in most cases, but we will still have the basic building blocks of Sinister Strike and procs of pistol shots. There's a little bit of difference with how you use pistol shots with this build, however, just a little bit. If let's say you have 5 calm points, when you have more than 3 calm points, you kind of want to delay uses of pistol shots in order to maximize their effectiveness. Because of Fan the Hammer, pistol shots can generate a bunch of calm points in a single shot. So you kind of want to try to delay it if at all possible if you're sitting at 4 or more calm points at any point. So what that will look like when you're trying to generate calm points, like if let's say you have 4 calm points and you have opportunity procs, you'll actually will Sinister Strike just to keep building calm points, and then you'll use pistol shot in order to maximize their overall effectiveness. So you will actually delay pistol shots by a little bit because it's actually a little bit more efficient for the calm point building and spending. And with Fan the Hammer, you can have up to 6 stacks of opportunity procs at once. So it's perfectly fine for you to actually delay those opportunity procs until a better moment, because then you could be a lot more efficient with your calm point building and spending. And this playstyle is going to be a little bit more strict when it comes to your calm point building and spending in particular. Now, besides this, we still have the same calm point builders such as Ghost Strike. It has exactly the same function, and ideally you want to use it on a target that's going to live for as much as possible. Then now we have another cooldown to use as a calm point builder called Echo and Reprimand. Echo and Reprimand is a calm point builder that doesn't cost a lot of energy, deals a decent bit of physical damage, generates 2 calm points, and anima charges your calm points for 45 seconds. It just turns them blue. And together with the talent of Resounding Clarity, we actually add 3 calm points that it anima charges. So what does anima charge calm point means? It's very, very simple. You'll see most of my calm points don't have any special border, but 3 here do, and when I do land a calm point, it'll actually be blue instead of red. That means if let's say you land your calm points on 3 calm points, instead of being 3 calm points, it treats it like 7 calm points. So if let's say you reach that blue, you're free to use a finisher immediately. As you build more calm points, land on a blue, use a finisher immediately, and that's all you have to do. You don't need to adjust your playstyle and rotation for calm point building in order to be able to meet those blue calm points. You still want to be able to play your abilities effectively, just if you happen to land on a blue, use your finisher immediately. And what does landing on a blue mean? This is landing on a blue. This is not landing on a blue because it lands on a red. Your last calm point generated has to be blue and not red, because if I use a finisher now, it doesn't consume any of these. I land on a blue, it consumes it, but if I don't land on a blue, it does not consume it. That is something that a lot of people actually struggle with when it comes to figuring out Outlaw Rogue, but with this anima charge calm point, if you land on a blue, just use your finisher. That's all you have to do. And lastly, like we had for a hidden opportunity, if you're running with Death Maneuvers, then you'll be able to use the ability of Blade Flurry in order to generate calm points. Though, just like hidden opportunity, you ideally want to use Blade Flurry if you're fighting 5 or more targets, but the rest of it, you kind of just want to use the rest of your abilities when it comes to building and spending calm points. With the keep it rolling build, you want to keep building calm points until you have 6+ calm points available, or 5+, but only inside of Vanish subterfuge windows. When it comes to spending your calm points, the same rules apply. If you're in stealth or in subterfuge, or if let's say Vanish and Adrenaline Rush are longer than 45 seconds off of coming back off of cooldown, then you could use it between the eyes. It does exactly the same thing with this build as it does with Hidden Opportunity. Otherwise, you want to maintain Slice and Dice, but you don't really need to refresh Slice and Dice since you'll be doing that with Dispatch. And when the requirements for the other 2 finishers are not met, then you'll be using Dispatch as your primary calm point spender. And when it comes to your cooldowns, we're basically going to be following the same cooldown priority as the Hidden Opportunity Ambush Outlaw builds. Blade Flurry will be used when you're fighting 2 or more targets, and you basically just want to maintain it at all times when you're fighting more than a single target. Roll the Bones, just like before, it has the same priority. You want to roll it whenever it's not available, and re-roll it if you can activate it with things such as loaded dice procs from your Adrenaline Rush. Though we are going to be adding another ability to place around the common points, we just keep it rolling. This ability allows us to refresh and extend the duration of our current combat enhancements by 30 seconds. And as an Outlaw Rogue, we'll be using this ability whenever we have 4 buffs active at once, 4 or more in fact. Another way we could passively generate Roll the Bones buffs is through Count the Odds. Whenever we ambush, Sinnerstrike, or dispatch at a target, this also counts during Crackshot windows, which gives us a free dispatch. There's a 50% chance we gain a Roll the Bones buff that we don't already have for 8 seconds. This is how we're able to generate multiple buffs at the same time. And when you catch yourself with 4 or more buffs available, you could use Keep It Rolling to extend all of those buffs. And that's basically the whole thing we'll be using Keep It Rolling for, is to, when we catch ourselves with multiple buffs, we extend them and hold on to them for as long as possible. The ability of Keep It Rolling is also pretty long of a cooldown, but it can be reduced down with cooldown reduction mechanics that we mentioned before, and it's a very, very powerful ability, and it's all about timing and catching those buffs when they're available. Later in this video, I'll have a section about some of the WeakAuras that you can use in order to make Keep It Rolling and playing around that ability a little bit easier. But if you ever catch yourself with 4 buffs, you should use it to extend all of them, because that is how we get a bulk of our overall damage as this type of build specifically. Adrenaline Rush, we talked about it earlier when the Hidden Opportunity, but you basically want to maintain this ability at all times. You also want to account for the fact that it's going to generate common points and grant you procs of 4 loaded dice for your next Roll of the Bones. Vanish, we talked about before, we'll primarily be utilizing it in order to gain subterfuge windows, in order to freeze the duration of our Adrenaline Rush, and during that time we'll also be spamming this money between the eyes in order to take advantage of Crackshot. And we will only be using Vanish inside of our Adrenaline Rush windows. We never use Vanish all on its own, and it's for the most part going to be an offensive cooldown, not a defensive cooldown, so in PvE content you can't use it for defensive purposes. As for the opener you want to use as an Outlaw Rogue, we don't really have a complex opener like Subtlety or Assassination. Before a combat encounter, what you can do is use Adrenaline Rush and then dive into Stealth immediately to make sure that Adrenaline Rush does not lose any uptime. Then we roll the bones to get value out of a loaded dice and spend the common points we have right now into a slicing dice just so we can get started and be ready for combat immediately. And then from there, you either open with an ambush as a Hidden Opportunity build or with Echo and Reprimand as a Keep It Rolling build. And then from there, you go into your rotation, building and spending common points. It isn't all that difficult. I guess you could change it a little bit in AoE content. You can open up with a Blade Flurry so you can activate your Cleave, but also generate common points immediately. But that's really about it. There isn't that much complexity when it comes to openers as an Outlaw Rogue. And as for the hero talent adjustments we'll have in terms of our rotation, we don't necessarily have any. Fatebound is the hero spec we'll be utilizing in majority of our builds, and the Hand of Fate playstyle is very, very passive. We already did make some rotational adjustments, especially as an ambush build, in order to meet those 5 common points instead of 6 common points. One, because it's more efficient on your common points and generation, because you generate so many resources, but also because it plays better around the Hand of Fate ability. There might be some rotational adjustments and even talent adjustments if Trickster ever becomes a playstyle, but as of right now, Fatebound does not have any competition. Trickster is just not that viable and not that powerful for Outlaw. In future builds, however, if there are some playstyles that are available for Trickster, I'll probably make a separate guide on some of the Trickster builds and playstyles, but also I'll update the written version of this guide, found in our Discord channel, by the way. Click the description down below for that one if you want to see it, but I'll update that written version guide for any Trickster changes or variations, if any arise in future updates. As for gearing and stats for your Outlaw Rogue, I highly recommend simming your character. Using the Raidbot's website and the SimBot, or rather Simulation Craft add-on, you're able to pull up your whole SimC profile of your rogue, be able to copy paste it into the website to find out your best gear, what items are going to be the biggest upgrade, how much damage you should be doing within Sims. But SimC is a fantastic add-on, and if you're really serious about playing your rogue effectively and trying to optimize your gear, trying to optimize your stats, definitely start utilizing it if you're thinking about getting serious about playing your Outlaw Rogue within Season 1 of War Within. That being said, I did want to give you guys some general priority of like some of the things you should look out for when it comes to gear, when it comes to some of the interesting items you should probably look out for when it comes to raids and dungeons. So for the most part, when it comes to stats, when it comes to getting new gear, you want to get as much agility as possible in your gear. If an item offers you more agility, rather if it's a higher item level, as long as it's not a neck piece or trinkets or rings, anything that grants you more agility is generally an upgrade, so you should always get it if it has a higher item level. From there on, you want to reach certain breakpoints of haste. If you're playing the ambush hidden opportunity build, you want to get about 8 to 10 to 12% haste maybe, but that's like the minimum amount of haste you need, and the rest could be going into versatility. From there, it's critical strike, as then mastery being your least desirable stat. If you're playing keep it rolling build, however, you want between 18 to 20% haste, followed by versatility, followed by critical strike, as well as mastery is your least desirable stat. Some of the items you should probably look out for when it comes to, let's say, the raid of Nerebar Palace is the fist weapon of Void Reaper's Warblade. This is a fantastic weapon for the spec of Outlaw Rogue. It doesn't have the best secondary stats per se, but the extra additional effect that it provides is definitely more than worth it. Especially if you can pair it together with the trinket of Void Reaper's Contract, it actually adds you an extra bonus effect between the blade or the fist weapon and the trinket that allows you Void Reaper's Contract to always summon additional phantoms against enemies afflicted by Queensbane. So it's a very powerful combination that can be used together. However, if you're primarily going to be gearing through dungeons, then when it comes to your main hand weapon, which should be like a heavier weapon like a sword, mace, axe, or a fist weapon, there isn't too many good ones from dungeons, so just pick whatever has the highest item level. However, as an Outlaw Rogue, it is ideal and best case scenario for you to run a dagger in your offhand. It just ends up synergizing a little bit better. It grants you more auto attacks, which plays better without poisons and plays a little bit better with the ability of Blade Flurry. If you have a weapon that's like a sword or a dagger and they're both same item level, the dagger is going to be slightly better in your offhand, but you should always run the highest item level weapons in either one of your hands. Now, another good trinket that you can get if you're not going to be doing the Nerebar Palace is from the dungeon of Necrotic Wake, which is a bottled flayed wing toxin. This one is a fairly highly recommended one, though if you don't really want to be running through Necrotic Wake because that dungeon can be quite tough early on in the season, Siege of Borealis' Deadeye Spyglass is also another fantastic alternative, or if you want a little bit more haste, the first boss of Arakara has an Arakara Sagboot, which has a great amount of haste and fantastic bit of agility, which has excellent uptime within PvE content. There's also the tier sets, which I haven't mentioned in any of the other rogue guides, but our tier sets are really not that consequential in this expansion. You should get it when it's available, but they're not that strong. None of them really are for rogues. Rogues don't necessarily need the tier set, but you should still get it. It's a slight DPS gain either way, but they're not really anything to write home about. They also don't impact our rotation whatsoever, so you should get it, but they're not really all that interesting. When it comes to crafting gear, there's still a bit of volatility when it comes to tuning, so it's best to save your sparks if you're just not sure. Especially, it's it's expensive to craft anything right now at the beginning of an expansion. But based on the current tuning right now, the best embellishments are going to be those with elemental focusing lens. If you are trying to craft a couple of those on your Outlaw Rogue, the best ones are going to be for the pants and the bracer slots, since we don't really have any good secondary stat pants available. All this embellishment does is it allows us to deal additional damage to our target based on the kinds of gems that we have in our gear, particularly rings, neck slots, and as well as any of the other armor slots. It can also be swapped out for Duskweave embellishment, which increases your versatility when you're above a certain number of health, or rather a certain percentage of health, if anything. But they're both very, very close to each other, plus none of the embellishments are really all that effective with this expansion, so it's just a very, very minor gain. They could potentially tune them in the future, and if they do end up tuning them and there's a better alternative, I'll definitely update the written version of the guide, but right now, Elemental Focusing Lens seems to be the better choice, especially if you're primarily focused on single target content. Then let's do a quick rundown for the Enchants and Consumables. When it comes to enchants, ideally in raid content, you'll want to pick up the Authority of the Depths for both weapons. For your cloak enchant, you'll want the Winged Grace. For your chest, you want the Crystalline Radiance. For your braces, you want the enchant of the Armored Avoidance. Stormbound armor kit should be applied to your legs, and Defender's Merch should be applied to your boots. Ideally, for your rings, you'll run either the Critical Strike or the Haste, depending on the kind of stats that you need. As for consumables, ideally you want the Flask of Tempered Versatility, and for potions you want the Tempered Potion. You also want to pick up some Algari health potions if you're looking for more survivability. For our weapons, we want to imbue them with the Iron Claw Whetstones, and you can always pick up Crystallized Augment Rune, but those are going to be really expensive at the beginning of the season. For a feast, usually Feast of Midnight Masquerade will be the play when it comes to raid content, but any feast that provides agility or even high amounts of versatility is fine as well. For gems, we want to go with the Culminating Blasphemite, and for your gems, ideally quick Sapphire. Also, in the description of this video, as well as in the written version of this guide on our Discord channel, I'll have a couple of links for a few WeakAuras that can make your time playing Outlaw Rogue a little bit easier. I don't really use too many add-ons or too many WeakAuras in order to bog down my own personal gameplay. I like to keep my UI fairly clean looking as best as I can help it. But WeakAuras for playing Outlaw can definitely make the experience a lot easier in some cases. First one is going to be a Roll the Bones WeakAura by Binded. It's a simple WeakAura that just tracks your Roll the Bones and lets you know when you need to re-roll your Roll the Bones. It also takes into account your current set of buffs and your current build and whatever you're playing into, whether it's hidden opportunity or keep it rolling, and it's generally fairly accurate. The next one is going to be the same guy, making a WeakAura for how to use Keep It Rolling. All it does is it lets you know when you have 4 or more buffs active. It lets you know that you should lock in those buffs right now with Keep It Rolling. It's just a simple WeakAura to track and remind you when you have 4 buffs available, so you don't have to micromanage all those buffs all at once. The last one is going to be for the Between the Eyes ability and Crackshot, which tracks the aura of Between the Eyes, as well as when the ability of Vanish is available, and really just helps you maximize the use of your Between the Eyes within your Crackshot windows. It also lets you know when the ability of Between the Eyes can be used outside of stealth as well. It gives you an option of when you can safely use Between the Eyes outside of stealth in order to be able to have that ability back up for when you have another go with Vanish, as well as those Crackshot windows. But with that being said, that's going to be my long overdue guide for the spec of Outlaw Rogue. It is surprising how good it's performing right now at the beginning of Season 1, and it looks like it's going to have a fairly bright future going forward over the next few updates. As always, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this guide video, and I hope all of you enjoyed. If you did enjoy it or found this guide informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate that. Join our Discord community if you want to see the written version of this guide, and if you want to hang out with the rest of the community, ask any questions regarding rogues. Probably the best place to reach me directly if you have any rogue questions specifically, or if you want more clarity regarding the guide. Also, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below, and I'll see all of you guys in the next one.